Okay, so let's keep going here. So we have established that it is reasonable to believe that there's something out there. This thing we call God. Okay, there's something out there. Okay, let's say that a God exists. But you'll notice what question that still leaves open, though. What question you notice that still leaves? Which God? Whose God? Because every society in history has believed that something's out there. But there are just as many ideas of who this something is. Who and what that something is. What they want, what they value, what they desire. And so the claim of Christianity is that God took on human form, came down to us, and introduced himself to us. It's like the old story of the man who lives in a cabin in the woods, and it's the dead of winter, and he's sitting by his fireplace, and he hears a knocking at his window, and he looks out there, and he sees that there's a sparrow at the window. And it's shivering, it's cold, it's attracted to the light and warmth of the fire inside. So, of course, he goes to the window, and he opens the window to try to let the sparrow in. Of course, what does the sparrow do? Flies away, right? And so he goes back to there, waits a little longer. Again, here's a tapping. There's a group of sparrows. Tries to go sneak to open the window. Sparrows all scattered and flying in the trees nearby. So he spends like an hour just trying to get the sparrows inside. He tries sneaking around the outside, tries letting crumbs. And every time the sparrows see him, they're terrified of him. They fly away. And he's watching them all in the cold, suffering, knowing they're going to freeze to death. And he thinks to himself, if only I could become a sparrow and tell them who I am and show them what I am and that I mean them no harm and that I love them, I'm trying to help them. At that moment, he realizes why God came as a man. That's the claim of Christianity. And the story of this claim lies in the Gospels. Now, the discussion of the reliability of the Bible as a whole is a very big discussion. But I like to focus on the Gospel specifically, because they are claiming to be biographical accounts telling the, what kind of truth? Objective truth about the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of the man Jesus of Nazareth. The Gospels don't claim to be just some nice stories that give good life lessons. The claim is these are things that actually happened. One of my favorite openings in the Gospels is actually the opening of Luke. It says, many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those from the beginning were eyewitnesses. It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. In other words, what Luke is claiming is he's saying, you've heard stories of what happened, so I've gone around and compiled eyewitness accounts. Now, what's an eyewitness? What does that mean? Yeah, someone who saw the thing happen. And so he's not just saying, here's a nice story for you to listen to. He's saying, no. Here is what the eyewitness testimony is saying happened. That's a very bold statement, isn't it? So this brings up the question of historical reliability. And so any ancient historical document undergoes tests to show evidence of authenticity and reliability. We find texts all over the place, but not every text is necessarily historical. For example, one of the most famous work of literature besides the Bible is actually the Iliad. Anybody know what that's about? What is the Iliad about? Yeah, Greek mythology, the Trojan War, so this, the Odyssey, Odysseus, all that. That's actually the second, basically, most famous work of literature behind the Bible. We'll get to that in a bit. But is the Iliad history? No, it's epic poetry. Homer is not claiming the Iliad actually happened. But the Bible is claiming that the Gospels are claiming that they actually did happen. And so that means that it has to go through certain tests to see if it's telling the truth. Because just because something is saying that it's true, does that mean that it is? No. If you believe that, I have a nice timeshare to sell to you after all this. Come see me after. Okay? So what we're going to do is, again, evidence. We're going to go through a few tests that historians use to determine whether a historical document is reliable or not. we're going to put the Gospels to those tests, and then you decide based on the evidence if the Gospels are historically reliable. Is it blind or reasonable faith? Sound good? Okay. First test is internal consistency. Internal consistency. You're sitting in your house doing work. Suddenly, crash. Uh-oh. You go over and you find your prized vase has been shattered and both your children standing there doing their best to look anything but guilty. What do you do? Let me ask you, do you question them together? What do you do if you're smart? You say, okay, you come with me first, tell me what happened. Okay, go wait there. Now your turn. You come tell me what happened. What are you looking for? You're looking for consistency. Are there any differences in what they are claiming happened? If there are some major differences in what they claimed happened, something is afoot. So, are there any glaring internal contradictions within the writing? Now, it's very important to differentiate between a contradiction and a different perspective. Those are not the same thing. Contradictions are two different claims that cannot both be true at the same time at the same place. So, for example, Adelaide, my daughter, says, Daddy, I was in the bathroom when the vase broke. Josiah can't talk, but if he could, he would say that Adelaide was in the living room when the lamp broke. What's the problem here? Those cannot both be true at the same time. That is an inconsistency. Now, a different perspective are two claims that are different but can still both be true. For example, John said he was at the movies when it happened, but James says that John was at home at the same time. Those cannot both be true at the same time. But John said he went to the movies after school, but Jim said John went to the store first, then went to the movies with friends. Now, can those both be true at the same time? Yeah, I just left out the part about going to the store, but that's not a contradiction, right? That's just a different perspective. There's a car crash. Someone says, oh, I heard a squeal and then a scream, and then the car hit the pole. Someone else said, oh, I heard a dog barking, and then I heard a loud bang, and then the car hit the pole. Do those two things contradict each other? No, they're just different perspectives. So, we're going to take a look at some of the differences between the Gospels. Anybody here ever do like an in-depth study of the four Gospels? And you'll notice there are actually some interesting differences between them. So we're going to look at the differences between them. And we're going to see, are these contradictions or are they different perspectives? Because this is one thing you will hear a lot of people claim, is the Gospels are full of contradictions. If that's true, should we believe them? No. If the Gospels are full of contradictions, do not believe that they're true. Don't believe them. Again, if you do believe them anyway, I got a timeshare to sell to you. Let's look at the claims, let's look at the differences and determine, are they contradictions or perspectives? First of all, how many women were at the tomb? Well, in Matthew, it mentions two women, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. How would you like to be that girl? I'm the other Mary. Mark mentions three women. It mentions Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and a lady named Salome. Luke mentions several women, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and others. John only mentions Mary Magdalene. Are these differences? Yes. Now, the first question is, can these all be true at the same time? The answer is yes. They are not contradictions. Now, if John said only Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, would we have a problem then? Yes. But it does. All he says is, when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. Leaving out the other people does not contradict those statements. So this is not a contradiction. This is a different perspective. Again, if it said only that person, we have a problem. That's not what he says. How about, how many angels were at the tomb? Anybody know? Sure? Well, Matthew mentions an angel who rolled back the stone and talked to the women. Mark mentions a young man who was interpreted as an angel sitting inside the tomb. Luke mentions two men who he interpreted as angels and dazzling clothes appearing suddenly. John mentions two angels sitting where Jesus' body had been. Are there some differences going on here? So now you have to decide, do you think can all these statements be true at the same time? Reasonably, yes. Again, if Mark said only one, or if Matthew said there was only one angel there, and John said, no, there were two, would that be a contradiction? Yes. But if I'm walking down the road and two guys come up and mug me, right? One's tall and one's short, and the police come and say, yeah, there's a tall guy mugged me. And someone else says, yeah, there's a tall and a short guy who mugged him. Are those contradicting statements? No. They're just focusing on different details. So again, this is a difference, but it's not a contradiction. They can be true at the same time. They just focus on different things. Jesus' post-resurrection appearance. Who did Jesus appear to first after he rose?
Mary.
Sure?
Women.
Well, let's find out what they say. Matthew describes, the first one it describes him appearing to is to the women, and then to his disciples in Galilee. Mark mentions Mary Magdalene first. Luke first mentions the two disciples on the road and then others in Jerusalem. Doesn't mention the women. John mentions Mary Magdalene and the disciples in Jerusalem. Now, are these contradictions or different perspectives? If, for example, Matthew said the first person Jesus appeared to was women, but then Luke says the first people Jesus appeared to were his male disciples, would that be a contradiction? Yes. But is that what it says? No, it just says, then Jesus appeared to such and such. It's not giving a strict, here's exactly the order that it happened in. It's just mentioning who it was first. If I say, yeah, I talked to my boss, and I talked to my wife, and I talked to my kid, and then someone else I say, yeah, I talked to my kid after I talked to my boss. Is that a contradiction? No. I'm just leaving out certain details for whatever reason, for whatever part of the story. So these are different perspectives, but they can still all be true because they're not saying anything to the exclusion of the others. It's kind of like when you're interrogating somebody. Now, I mentioned my two kids telling their story. They gave contradictory evidence. Let's say the opposite happens. Let's say I'm interrogating my two kids and they give me exactly the same story verbatim. Word for word. Oh, it must be what happened then. Is that my conclusion? No. Again, if it is, I got to feel for you. Why not? Why do I not assume, oh, their stories are so exactly the same, that must be what happened? What do I assume? They've collaborated. Out of this, okay, decide. Here's what happened. Here's our story, okay? That's what I assume happened. And it's a perfectly reasonable assumption. That's why when police are interrogating somebody, will they ask the person to say what happened just once? What do? They'll make you repeat it over and over and over and over again. Because they're looking for two things. One, they're looking for, do you contradict yourself at all? But they're also looking for, do you use exactly the same words and sentences that you kept using? Because if you contradict yourself, well, there's something wrong with your story. If you sound a little bit too similar, you're still up to something. There's this zone here where a different perspective actually gives more reliability to a story. If all four Gospels presented all these stories in exactly the same way, would that be evidence that they're reliable? No. In fact, what would we conclude about them? They collaborated. The fact that there are these differences actually is all the more evidence that, yeah, they were independent sources. They may have inspired each other a bit. Like we know that some Gospels reference other ones. But there's enough differences in there that they didn't just collaborate together. It's like listening to a band. Every instrument has a different sound. But the question you're looking for is not do they sound the same, it's are they in what? Yeah, are they in harmony? They sound very different, but they harmonize. That's what you're looking for in multiple accounts of a historical figure. You're looking for different sounds. You're looking for different details. You're looking for differences. The question is not, are there differences? The question is, do those differences harmonize, or is there discord? Do they contradict one another? And in the Gospels, we see very clearly this idea that there are differences, but they harmonize. So that's the first historical evidence, is internal consistency. Second is archaeology. Like Indiana Jones, right? And so archaeology, does the account talk about archaeologically verifiable people and places? Meaning, is it a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away? And if it says that's where it happened, what's our problem here? There's no archaeological evidence of that. If I said on Sunday Gandalf visited the Shire, what's my problem with this story? There's no archaeological evidence that that person or that place existed when you go to New Zealand. And so the question, so are the people and places mentioned archaeological evidence? And are they affirmed anywhere outside of the Gospels? Well, let's take a look first at some people that are mentioned. And evidence that they actually were real people. First of all, it's Pontius Pilate. Did you know there was actually a long time where it was believed Pontius Pilate didn't exist? Because there was no evidence outside of the Gospels that Pontius Pilate existed. Until a few decades ago, when the Pilate stone was discovered in Caesarea, that actually says, here served Pontius Pilate under the reign of Augustus in the year blah, blah, blah. And so we actually found, oh, I guess he actually was a real person. Herod the Great, mentioned in the Gospels. We know he existed because we have his palaces. There's coins with his pictures. Herodian, another contemporary historian, talked about him. He's mentioned in Matthew 2. Herod Antipas, coins, city of Tiberias. We know that he existed because there's archaeological evidence of him. Caiaphas, that's another one. Caiaphas, I've heard both. Who was he again? The high priest. Just like Pilate, there was actually a while where we didn't think that he existed. And then his ossuary was found, which is where his bones were kept. Sure enough. And then John the Baptist, Josephus, who was an ancient historian, talks about John the Baptist. So these are people that are mentioned in the Bible that we find out later, actually, yeah, they did exist. How about places? Capernaum. We found Capernaum. This is not the lost city of Atlantis. We found houses. We found synagogue ruins in the location the Bible says that it's at. Bethlehem. I mean, it's still there. People still live there. You can still go there. You probably don't want to go there. I'm pretty sure it's not that place. But it's still there. Jerusalem. I mean, yes, obviously, we know Jerusalem is there. Jerusalem exists. New conspiracy theory, by the way. Jerusalem doesn't even exist. Bethany, we found tombs and houses in Algeria. The Sea of Galilee. What's fascinating with the Sea of Galilee is that it's actually changed over time. It used to be a different shape than it is now. And so we've actually found boats and harbor cities remains along the shorelines. And Tyre, more archaeological ruins discovered of this city. So the point is that the people and places listed in the Gospels are not, Yoda and Atlantis, right? They're not these mythical figures you never see anywhere else. They're historically verifiable people and historically verifiable places. And here are some examples, we're not going to read all of them, but some contemporary. These are hostile ancient historians of the time period around Jesus who talk about Jesus. Pliny the Younger mentions in his histories that the followers of this man Jesus thought he was God. The Talmud, which is the Jewish history, very not for Christ, talks about how this man Jesus was executed the day before Passover. It even says he held magical powers. Thallus, who is an ancient historian, talks about how this man Jesus lived, who was crucified, and he attests that the moment he died, there was darkness and earthquakes. Not in the Bible. Totally separate account. Tacitus, Barsapion, Phlegon, there's all kinds of contemporary scholars from the time that talk about Jesus, and not in a nice way. The point is, Jesus existed. We know that Jesus existed. Anybody who says Jesus didn't exist, you may as well tell George Washington didn't exist. We know that he existed. And then finally, third test, manuscript evidence. So this is the question, is what we have now originally written? Because we say, okay, it's internally consistent. Okay, the people and places match what we know is there. But how do we, because has a long time passed since this was written? And can things change over time? You guys play the telephone game? It's hilarious playing with kids. Especially, by the way, if you're playing telephone, make sure you use this. Can you can a can as a can or can a can? What's the point of the telephone game? Is that if I start with the phrase over here, you whisper it around, what's going to happen to that message by the time it gets over here? It's totally changed. And so one common claim is that that's what happened to the Gospels. Yes, the Gospels told the truth. Yes, they're reliable, but what we have now is corrupted. It's not actually what they originally wrote. It's a translation of a translation of a translation. Anybody ever have played the game of putting a phrase to Google Translate multiple times? It's actually a really fun game. Go put like the dog jumped over the log, put it in Google Translate, translate, translate. It's really funny seeing what it turns it into. So how do we know that what we have now is actually what they wrote back then? Perfectly reasonable. So yeah, historians ask two questions when determining whether what we have now is what was originally written. First, how long after the events are the earliest writings? Because if it's been a long time since the event to the earliest thing that we wrote it, what does that say about its reliability? Not very reliable, but if it's closer to the event, what does that say? It's more reliable. Second question, how many copies of these early writings do we have? Because if I only have one copy of a writing, well, I mean, that's fine, but how do I know that that's reliable? Maybe it was changed, maybe it wasn't. But if I have a bunch of copies, what can I do? I can compare them. I can examine them. Oh, here's the difference. Here's the same. So question one, how close to the event was the earliest writing? Question two, how many copies do we have? And I'll show you guys a simple graph here of historical events that we know happened, when they happened, how much time passed between that and the earliest writing, and how many manuscripts we have. So first of all, Caesar's Gallic Wars happened around 40 BC. Earliest manuscripts are from 1000 AD. So it's a 1,000-year difference, and we have 251 manuscripts. Nobody doubts that those wars happened. Despite being 1,000 years later, we have so many manuscripts. Yeah, we know that there was the Gallic War. That's even confirmed. Demosthenes' speeches is like a political commentary. Okay, 300 BC. Earliest manuscripts 1180. That's 1,400 years. 340 manuscripts. Nobody doubts that what we have is actually what Demosthenes actually said. Aristotle's writings. You might know who's Aristotle? Who was it? You might know who Aristotle's teacher was? Yeah, Plato. Who was Plato's teacher? The man himself, Socrates. And by the way, who did Aristotle teach? Alexander the Great. Pretty cool. So Aristotle's writings. Around 350 BC, earliest manuscripts 850 AD. That's a 1,200-year difference, but we have 1,000 manuscripts. Nobody doubts that what we have is what Aristotle wrote. Homer's Iliad. Again, one of the most famous pieces of writing. 800 BC. Earliest is 400 BC. That's only a 400-year difference. But now look at the Gospels. The time difference is between 30 and 150 years after the event, and we have over 25,000 manuscripts. The second most reliable historical manuscript, the Iliad, it's not even a close second, is it? So if we can be reasonably sure that the Gallic Wars, the Iliad, Aristotle's writings, based on manuscript evidence that what we have now is what they wrote, is it reasonable to assume that what we have in the New Testament is actually what they originally wrote. I'll let you decide. Interesting point here as well. I want to point out here. If you recall, at the very beginning, Mr. Keystar pointed out that Mr. Bart Ehrman, by the way, he's an atheist New Testament scholar. Do with that what you will. But he's the guy who actually found out, yeah, there's 400,000 variations. Okay, so the question then becomes the quality of the variations. They do not change anything. 99.8% of them are grammatical. It's using an E instead of an I, or putting the instead of a. Right? And it's also worth mentioning again that it's 400,000 manuscripts, it's 400,000 variants spread among what? 25,000 manuscripts, which means 16 spelling errors per manuscript. Is that enough to say that no, it's been completely altered and changed and is totally corrupt? I'll let you decide based on the evidence what you think is reasonable. So in short here, evidence. Is the evidence that the Gospels are historically reliable? Based on what we've seen here, I'll let you make your own conclusions. I sure think it does. Now, we're going to take a look at our next question here then. Okay, so the Gospels are reliable. But what's the biggest, most important, and most outrageous claim made in all the Gospels? That Jesus rose from the dead. This is what it all comes down to, isn't it? This one historical event. Did it happen or didn't it? And why does it matter? It matters a lot. Take a look here what Paul said. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God because we testified about God that he raised Christ. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. One of the unique aspects of Christianity that makes it so different from every other religion is the fact that it is falsifiable. Anybody know what is falsifiable? Anybody know what that means? So what falsifiable means, it means that it can be proven false if it's not true. Non-falsifiable means there's no way to show it didn't happen. For example, what is the central historical event in Islam? Where they got the Quran. Anybody know? That Muhammad was close. That Muhammad was in a cave, and the angel Gabriel came and said, recite, and told him the Quran. Is there any way to show that didn't happen? No. There's really no way to show it didn't happen, is there? It's not falsifiable. The central tenet of Mormonism is what? What's the historical event? Yeah, he found the golden plates and they just happened to disappear, right? Is there any way to show that that did not happen? No, it's not falsifiable. And that's actually not a good thing for them. Because in any kind of theory, be it historical or scientific, one of the ways you know that it's a reliable theory is if there's a reliable way to disprove it. Because if there's no way to show that it didn't happen, then there's not much reason to think that it did happen. Christianity is unique because it is based on a very falsifiable claim. Meaning, if it didn't happen, it's not hard to prove that it didn't happen. The claim being that Jesus rose from the dead, appeared to a couple people, to a whole bunch of people over a couple hours, over days and days. I mean, is that a pretty bold lie to make up if it didn't happen? That's pretty bold to say all that, isn't it? If it didn't happen, it's falsifiable. Because here's the thing. If you want to prove Christianity is false, it's not hard to do. Paul himself says it. All you have to do is show that the evidence for Jesus' resurrection is not reliable. Now, notice what I didn't say there. I didn't say you have to disprove his resurrection. It's always tricky trying to disprove a historical event. Rather, take the evidence for it and show that it's not reasonable. If you can do that, you have destroyed Christianity. 2,000 years later, hasn't happened yet. But let's take a closer look at this. What we're going to look at here is what's called the minimum facts approach. So this is pioneered by other famous apologists, and it's really simple. The minimum facts approach accounts for the facts that nearly all scholars agree upon and leads us to the rational conclusion that the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ is the best explanation for the known historical data. In other words, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to look at a couple of facts that everybody agrees on. Christian, non-Christian, atheist, whatever. Just a few facts that everybody agrees historically happened. And then we're going to say, based on the evidence, what's the most reasonable explanation. Sound good? All right, take a look here. First one. Jesus died by crucifixion. Again, one of the most historically indisputable facts, and also one of the biggest problems with Islam, by the way. It's recorded by all four Gospels and non-biblical accounts, Tacitus, Josephus, the Talmud. We know the man named Jesus, who lived in the Roman Empire in the region of Nazareth, who died by crucifixion. We know that happened. And crucifixion is a well-known method of execution in the Roman Empire. This is something everybody agrees happened. He was executed. He was crucified. And again, bringing this up again, multiple accounts talking about this man that they called Jesus was like Tacitus. They called him the Christ. He was executed under Pilate. Lots of accounts outside of just the Bible talk about this. Isn't it funny to think about places outside the Bible talking about Jesus from that time period? Look it up. Like when you get home, look it up. It's really fascinating. Second, Jesus' disciples died claiming to have seen him risen from the dead. Now, this is very important right here. They didn't die claiming they believed he had risen from the dead. Do people die for false beliefs all the time? Yes. The fact that somebody dies for a belief, does that make that belief true? No. But here's the key here. The disciples didn't die saying, we believe he rose. They died saying what? We saw him risen. We actually saw him. We walked with him. We talked with him. We ate with him. One of us stuck our fingers in the holes in his hands. People will die for things that they believe are true. But people do not die for what they know is a lie. So what do we conclude from this? We conclude, if nothing else, the disciples believed that they had seen him risen from the dead. Because if you look at history, some of the, shall we say, creative methods of death that some of them had to undergo, the whole time refusing to recant, saying, no, we did see it. If nothing else, it means that they really believe that they saw it. That's a historical fact that everybody agrees on. Third, the conversion of Paul. This is actually a really big deal. Okay? Here are the historical facts we know about Paul. First, he was a known persecutor of Christians. Again, even outside the Bible. We know this historically. A man named Saul, back then, was a Pharisee who persecuted Christians heavily. We know that as a historical fact. We also know that on his way to Damascus to arrest more Christians, he had some kind of experience. Something happened that completely changed him. He claims it was what? What does Paul claim happened to him? He claims he saw Jesus. And so he claims that Jesus bodily came to him and spoke to him. We know that as a fact, that that's what he claims happened. And we know that Paul then went on to live a life of success and prosperity and wealth and popularity for the things that he was preaching, right? No, very much not so. A life of hardship, life of desperation. He didn't get anything for this except grief. And yet, joy, weirdly enough. He went on to become, besides Jesus himself, the second most important person in Christian history for spreading the gospel. Fourth, the conversion of James, Jesus' brother. Who here's got siblings? Anybody got siblings? Even better, who here's got an older sibling? If your older sibling suddenly started going around saying, I am God, I am perfect, I have never sinned, what would your reaction be? Let me tell you a tale. Let's be honest. Does anybody know our flaws better than our siblings? No. Our siblings know our flaws the best. And so we know as a fact that Jesus' brother, his half-brother, James, because Joseph and Mary had kids after Jesus, that James was skeptical of Jesus' ministry. We know that. They even thought he was what? Crazy. They thought he was crazy. So James was skeptical of Jesus. We also know that after he claimed to see Jesus risen from the dead, James became a major leader in the church and was willing to die for that claim. So again, you have the guy's brother, who if anybody would know that, no, actually, I can tell you all the things that my big brother did that was wrong. Looking back, he said, actually, no, he was perfect. It's like the worst thing you say about your older brother, right? No, he was perfect. But for his sibling to say this, and again, he didn't gain wealth and popularity and prestige. He got suffering. He got persecution. He got death for claiming this. And he was willing to die for the claim that he saw his brother risen from the dead. Again, that is a historical fact, that he claimed it and he died believing it. Finally, fifth is the empty tomb. Little bit, this is like 95% accepted as opposed to like 99.999% accepted, but it's still almost universally accepted. That that the place that Jesus was buried, his body's gone. We have Caiaphas' body. We have George Washington's body. We have Muhammad's body. We have these bodies. We don't have Jesus' body. That's a fact. So now, here are some interesting... Now, does that itself mean that he rose from the dead? No. But here's some other interesting details about it. First of all, was the fact of the Jewish leadership, their explanation. If Jesus was not risen from the dead, what would have been the simplest way to finish the whole movement off? Bring his body out. Oh, they say he rose from the dead? No. Hey, pull that stone aside. Yeah, no, but here's his body right here. The fact that, what did they claim? They stole it. If nothing else, what does that show? That the body is gone. So his enemies came up with a different story. Oops. The discovery of the empty tomb by women. This is actually a very big deal. Because in ancient Jewish culture, women were second-class citizens. A woman's testimony was not worth anything in court. Women were not seen as reliable eyewitnesses. So if you were going to make up this story, you would not have said that it was women who saw him first. I like to imagine that the gospel writers are probably kind of grimacing a little bit as they're writing, yeah, Mary was the first one there. Because they know that this is going to hurt the believability, which is exactly what makes it more believable. The fact that Jesus said, and he's again, never produced the body to counter the claims. Again, this would have been the simplest way to crush the whole movement. Just produce the body. But they never did. Now, what about some alternate theories? Maybe there's other explanations for the empty tomb. Maybe Jesus didn't die. You guys heard the swoon theory? Maybe he swooned. Right? He passed out and the coolness of the tomb revived him. And so he came out and they're like, oh, he's risen. He's a zombie, but he's risen. Here's some problems here, okay? First of all, Roman executioners were very good at what they did. Roman soldiers, they knew when someone was dead. They wouldn't make a mistake like that. In fact, when you're hanging on the cross, does anybody know what is it that actually kills you when you're crucified? Suffocation. Because in order to breathe, you keep having to push up. And so once you've suffered enough, you either get too exhausted to push up, and so you suffocate, or what do they do to speed it up? Break your legs. and then you suffocate. They get to Jesus, they don't break his legs. Why? Because they see he's already dead. What do they do to make sure? The water and blood. And so again, this is an actual physiological effect where when your body undergoes massive trauma and stress, one thing that can happen is water actually can pool around the sac around your heart. And so the fact that he skewered him and we pulled out water and blood came out meant that his heart had been punctured. Ain't looking up from that. And of course, there's a simple fact that he didn't just convince them that he was alive, but that he was gloriously resurrected. Right? He comes crawling to that door, bleeding and gaunt and ripped to pieces. I am risen. Come on, really? If you'd probably be like, it's a zombie. No. So not only was he alive, but he was gloriously resurrected. Well, maybe the Jewish leaders were right. Maybe the disciples did steal the body, and they just claimed that Jesus had risen. Maybe that's the explanation for the empty tomb. Well, problems. What would they have gained from this? Fame, money, fortune, popularity, power? No. What did they get for it? Yeah. None of them recanted it, even in the face of horrific deaths. You know the old saying, as a two people can keep a secret of what? If one of them's dead. Same thing with a conspiracy. It's really hard to keep a conspiracy secret, especially among a group of 12 guys. 12 because of the bias after Judas, so we still say 12. And the fact that not a single one of them recanted. I mean, think about Watergate. Right? Think about Watergate. That was a bit of a conspiracy, wasn't it? How many people were involved in that, like on the inner circle? About 4 or 5. And they cracked pretty quick under pressure. Here you have 12 guys tortured to death. Not a single one recanted that they claimed to have seen him risen from the dead. If this was a conspiracy, that's not the most dedicated conspiracy people has ever existed. Mm-hmm. Maybe they hallucinated the resurrection. Maybe they're so grieving and they're so longing to see him alive that they thought that they saw him. Okay, well, there's a few problems with this too. First of all, first problem is that anticipation and expectation play crucial roles in hallucination. The idea of a bodily resurrection, as Jesus was apparently did here, was not a part of the Jewish philosophy at all. In fact, a lot of them didn't even believe resurrection would happen. So you don't really hallucinate things that you don't expect to see. Hallucination always plays some way into expectations and anticipations. And they were not in any way expecting or anticipating to see Jesus return. They even doubted after hearing about it, right? Even after the disciples. Poor Thomas. We give Thomas such a hard time, but we forget the other disciples also didn't believe until they saw him, right? And so even after they heard about it, they didn't believe that it had happened. Also, he didn't appear just once. He appeared over a whole bunch of people, over a whole period of time. He ate, they claimed he actually ate with them. He walked and talked. It's one thing, it's like, yes, I saw him at a distance in the haze, but I know that it was him. That's one thing. It's another thing, if it's, oh yeah, over the course of a month, I hung out with him. Either it happened or you got 12 people with a very interesting mental issue going on here. And you also notice, what question does that still not answer? Even if they did hallucinate it, what issue does that still leave on the table? The empty tomb. Still would explain why the tomb was empty. So again, the question is evidence versus proof. The claim of Jesus' resurrection is one of the most extraordinary claims ever. One of the most extraordinary claims you've ever seen. Which means it requires some pretty extraordinary evidence. So looking at the sheer amount of manuscript evidence of the New Testament, and honestly the Bible as a whole, I mean, have you considered the fact that how many books are in the Bible? 66 books, written over what period of time? Anybody know? About 1,500 years between Genesis and when Moses wrote Genesis to John writing Revelation. Over what geographical spanning? thousands of miles, over multiple cultures, were they all scholars, people who wrote the books of the Bible? Written by over 40 different authors, kings, peasants, shepherds, doctors, fishermen, just such a wide variety of people. 66 different books, written by dozens of authors, over 1,500 years, and yet is so completely unified in its message and theme. There's something going on there. The Bible's a weird book, guys. From a historical perspective, there's something strange with this book. You might even say supernatural. So we'll leave it to you to decide. Do you think the evidence is that the Gospels are reliable and that Jesus really rose from the dead? What do you think about that? So we're going to take another break here, one last break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how can I be prepared to use all of this? A lot of good information, but how can I prepare to use it? All right, let's take a breather.